plan for South Asia and specifically India? How are you looking at the potential to rebuild, reimagine, create a radically better impact on closing the, digital divide in partnership with governments and, private sector and communities?
UN Women is at the is on the table with decision makers both within the government. We have just managed to include a gender and inclusion track in the new conference that's being curated by the Ministry of Science and Technology. We have a large-scale program on digital access, which is where we're looking at the low end of digital access. We're trying to get more women in terms of access, in terms of use, in terms of leveraging really the internet for their own selves. And we're trying to work across the spectrum. So we're working on cybersecurity, which is an ecosystem issue. We're working on the low end of digital access and women's access to the internet and of course use of it. And on the high end, we're trying to work on inclusion and artificial and AI. Our major stakeholders on this still remain governments again, but we're working very, very closely with civil society again, because these are also voices that need to represent on how the space will be or needs to be equitable for everybody.
Gender norms are absolutely critical in limiting women's access to technology. So we chose IVR because we thought we would reach the maximum number of people. But what we also did is we addressed Kilkari to both husbands and wives. Actually, it's been really, really challenging to reach women, even with Kilkari, which is like the most basic kind of IVR service in the world, where it just makes outbound calls. The woman doesn't even need to dial in. So we designed it for maximum reach. We integrated with the Government of India's database of all pregnancies and births, NCTS and RCH for 13 states. All of that data flows into the Kilkari database, and it creates a schedule of messaging based on the woman's last menstrual period or the due date of the child. And so every week she gets an automated pre-recorded call linked to her stage of pregnancy and then the child's age. So she doesn't even need to dial a number, right? She just gets a call. Even so, the research that we've been doing with Johns Hopkins has indicated that we estimate that up to 50% of our high listeners are men. I think this has huge implications for anything around gender-based violence, anything that's disruptive around gender norms, because you could actually make the conflict worse.
Data on any of the gender work, gender programs, issues just not existed. This reason, I think we all should ask ourselves, why don't we have this data? Like, is it a fear of sharing? Is it the collection problem? Is it reporting problem? I honestly don't know. And I can tell you that I do know that some of us, quite a few of us, at least a few partners that we're talking to, are very concerned about this and are doing grants and are making grants to address this issue. It's always a contentious issue on how do you go about collecting data, which is where I think we should leave it to the experts, those organizations who are good at collecting sensitive information on how best to go and collect this information. We as funders are just saying that we're willing to, we acknowledge this as an issue and we would want to support it.
We need a systemic change. Just being aware of gender sensitive is too euphemistic a way to put it. Let's talk about patriarchy very clearly. Let's talk about structural systemic violence. Let's talk about all the structural norms very carefully. Let boys and girls both understand it. Let's first, all of us, push together to increase digital access and to actually point out that it's money very, very well spent. It's very cost effective. Our donors are delighted, by the way, and trying to give us more. I'm thrilled. So we are going to, because they realize that how it increases our outreach at a cost, and also these are small centers. You don't need more. Also, it takes education out of the time and space bounds of a school. It moves into the community. It harnesses forces that have so far been lying idle, unemployed, educated women. And it empowers them and it helps them reach out to others.
Public toilets are being designed by men. So how will they ever know what women need in the toilet? We are trying to solve for that problem by having a very equitable spread within the team who build that content. See, inclusivity, the importance of it if I have to speak in typical corporate greed terms, is healthier for the bottom line. The more women come into the fold, the more people buy the products, the better it is for us. The proliferation of internet, especially cheap data in India, cheap handsets in India has done, is it has somehow brought about a little bit of leveling, at least in people who have access or want to get access.
After 2012, the Nirbhaya case in 2012, we saw a proliferation of well-meaning tech people building apps for women's safety. And what we ended up with was, I think, some 150 emergency apps. Yeah, everyone built an emergency app. Now, this is a good intention, right? So I want to do something for this thing, but you don't really go to the user. You don't understand what women want. Data, there's been a study by the Center for Internet and Democracy. We have looked at police data, and the usage of women's emergency apps is next to nil. Okay, next to nil. I would actually ask anyone in this audience, have you actually used an emergency app ever? What we found from our research was that women sometimes download one and then delete it very soon, right? So the point is that what women want, right? Even when you're designing technology for women, you're not taking women's perspective. And I think that is a big problem. Innovative, even the usage of technology, right? We recognize the limitations, but we should not say, therefore women will not use technology, let's only use offline measures. And one thing I must say, we found not just young women, even older women, the moment they were given the tablet, they could use the app as easily as anybody else. So the divide is not in the skill, the divide is in the access.
Even as we've seen the gender digital divide, we've also seen that in the COVID context with the sort of somewhat forced digitization, what some of the innovations have been on ground. Let me talk about a couple of them. So one of the things, again, that we're supporting NRLM with is really gender training at scale across all the women members. I mean, that's 60 million members. We haven't even started it yet. We're still working on the curriculum. But what we have realized is the potential of models, as again Sarah was saying, and BBC Media Action has done quite a bit, whether it's on the Mobile Academy work that they've done, which provides one kind of a platform, or it's just using multiple media. I mean, it's even through shorter clips that can be passed on through WhatsApp. It's about IVRS messaging that can be sharp and strategic. It could be just audiovisual material that is developed with the purpose of, some kind of discussions, accompanied with, of course, some of those Zoom sessions, because I'm seeing now rural women across the country feeling very comfortable where they don't have access to the digital. We've also seen that the local officials or the federation leaders who do have smartphones or are able to, create that access, they just maybe gather at one of the centers at the panchayat or block level, and that's where they all come together for the Zoom calls and the meetings. So it's working. It is actually exposing a bunch of women to new technology, to newer ways of connecting with the world, to just seeing that there is, there's something out there that they were never part of. So I do think that a lot of that is also happening on the side that we need to build on and capitalize and strengthen.
Coding and toxic masculinity are together, they are imbibed together, and that is the major problem about the tech industry today. I would really request all of us to work with the panchayats and the state governments, because education is still a very, very local issue, to ensure there are safer spaces to women to study technology, and even before technology, science. Technology comes at class 10. The seed of science is laid pretty much in 4th and 5th, when your maths teacher is saying, oh, your maths is so bad like a woman. Now, these are comments I have heard while I used to go to school. So that systemic issue, unless we solve, we will not have that big number of leaders to choose from who can become, leaders in the tech world as well. The problem is quite clear. I think we need to work towards solutions. we spend a lot of time discussing the problem. I think we need to encourage our organizations and the activists to, start doing those micro changes, which leads to a larger solution.
First of all, there is, of course, the question of not having a data protection legislation at all. On top of that, though, I think what the government at the moment is suggesting, what we see in the data protection bill that's a draft currently in Parliament, is way insufficient to actually address the concerns women have. This whole thing of the way our data is used to control our bodies is relevant for everybody, but I think the potential harms of that, as feminists, as women, as people from marginalized communities, as trans people, we can just see much more clearly. Because earlier, this was done to our physical bodies, and now this is happening at one remove, which makes it harder to see. But for that reason, also the potential long-term implications of not having stronger protections around this are massive. Because by the time we realize it will be too late, right? And we will already be, I always ask, when does nudging become manipulation? We don't have an answer, but so much of what we do on the internet is going out of our control, no? How to take it back is really to think about data differently and think about data protections and the system we need around it.
We did a survey looking at the questions of access, digital access during the pandemic, and only 20% parents in government schools said they were able to access online education. Even in private schools, it's only 41% who could. Maybe one has to have a more realistic expectation of what digital can do. Maybe it is time to look at alternatives to technology, because it's not everyone manifestly is able to benefit. And maybe in terms of, yes, it has thrown everyone systems to the deep end because of the pandemic, but possibly we do need to approach this more gradually, because this system is probably not particularly ready right now. At the same time, all these issues of surveillance, etc., and the privacy probably need some resolution. So therefore, we are sort of in the wild west of digital education right now. In the long run, ultimately, the solution to the digital divide is to fix the divide rather than to allow it to continue. But in the immediate foreseeable future, it would be critical, in addition to everything that has been discussed so far, which is critical going forward, but also look at less expensive non-digital modes as well, because Dalits, tribals, Adivasi, especially girls in those communities, are not likely to benefit in the immediate future. Also, given all the reports that we are hearing of mothers selling their Mangal Sutras to get a mobile phone,